And we are live. Welcome everybody in. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I'm just going to retweet my live stream real fast and we will go ahead and get into it here. I hope everybody is having a fantastic Monday. Welcome to the new week. Welcome to the new you. Let's go ahead and cover some of the events going on in Ukraine right now. Hopefully everybody is doing good. We're just going to give it a second, wait for everybody to get in here. It's kind of seeming like a little bit more of a slow day today, so that's fine. We're just going to let it wind up a little bit, do some conversations. Remember, guys, if you have questions that you want answered during the live stream, the easiest way for me to see those is if you do that through Super Chats. I also appreciate the support, but most importantly, they actually pop up, so I have a list that I can see. So if you have questions that you want answered, that's the easiest way to get me to see them. In other news, I have just finished recording my Patreon video that should be up today or tomorrow, depending on when I have time to do it. I have some stuff to go do right after this. But be on the lookout for that Patreon video. You can find all of those links in the YouTube video description. The links to my Patreon, where you can join as a free member and get access to almost all of the content I have on there, as well as if you support me, you will get instant access to all new content. And then my Telegram and Twitter, where you can follow constant 24/7 updates on the war in Ukraine and news in general. So I really appreciate all of you being here today. We have a lot to cover. Obviously, as you can tell, this is episode number 90, almost to episode 100. We should be there within like the next 2 or 3 weeks or so. So that's pretty exciting. 100 live streams is going to be cool. I'll have to find something special to do for number 100. But I really appreciate you all being in here. And this is episode number 90, Ugledar on the clock. We have talked about Ugledar for 2 years. We have seen some drama play out around Ugledar previously with the Russian military. But the situation is now much different than it was in 2022. And I think that we are about to see the capitulation of the fortress city of Ugledar. The situation is deteriorating quickly for the AFU in that region, and that will be one of the primary focuses of today's video. But without further ado, let's go ahead and get into some of the updates. All right. Before I do that, let's see. Hi from Algiers. Hello. Vancouver. Awesome. Let's go. Let's see. Anybody else? We got Hungary. Albuquerque. What the? If you're actually in Albuquerque, what's up, dude? That's what's up. Italy, South Carolina, Slovakia, Portland, Serbia, and hello from my basement, my mom's basement. Well, listen, if you're saving on rent and living in your mom's basement and it's not annoying or embarrassing for you, there's not really much of a problem. That's one of those weird cultural things. I live in my own house and that shit's expensive as fuck. So let's not sugarcoat it. Well, I pay rent in my own house and it's expensive. Okay, let's go ahead and get into the map, shall we? Texas, North Korea, sure. Ontario, Canada, Netherlands. Awesome, guys. I'm glad there's so many people from around the world watching right now. All right, so obviously we can see some green on the map. We got some updates to go over. First and foremost, we will start up here in the Kupiansk sector, where the Russians have again made progress out of Pishane here and have expanded this sort of spearhead towards the Oskal River. The situation here now is becoming very difficult for the Ukrainians. They're looking at a 3-mile buffer zone, which means that FPVs, artillery, everything is able to operate in this area. The Russians also have high ground here, which means that they can fire ATGMs along logistics on this road. So there's a lot happening in this area, and units have been pulled from Kupiansk to defend the city of Pokrovsk. So we should begin to see a lot more movement on this bank of the Oskal River. One of my predictions is that this bank of the Oskal River will basically be forfeited by Ukraine as they seek to move resources to other more important areas of the front. This area of the front is important for the Ukrainians in the defense of Slavyansk and Kramatorsk, but as we've seen, if Pokrovsk falls, the defense of Izium becomes much, much less important for the Ukrainians, right? If the Russians get into Pokrovsk, the entire southern flank is going to fall. That's going to open up a massive amount of manpower. It's going to put Ukrainians on much worse lines, and Slavyansk and Kramatorsk lose a lot of their defensive value if Pokrovsk is lost, right? Same goes for Izium. They are sort of sister cities on either side of the Donbass urban conglomerate here that the Ukrainians are using for defense. So we should expect a bunch more progress along this side of the Oskol for the Russians as the situation continues to deteriorate in the south here for the Ukrainians. Okay. Coming down to the Siversk salient, again, another area where we haven't seen a ton of movement, and now we're beginning to see a lot more movement from the Russians in this area. So if we come down here, the Russians have advanced along the railroad and along this river right here, the Suka Platav River. Suka Platav. The Russians have captured Vimika in this village, and this is the last urban anything, in fact, before the Russians reach Siversk. So the Russians are now within 5 kilometers of Siversk, and that means that the Battle of Siversk could begin very shortly, as well as the closing of this pocket over here and the pocket around Bilohorivka, as well as this pocket down here. So there's potential for a lot of movement on the Siversk salient. Again, an area where we have not seen a lot of progress for the Russians, but the Ukrainians have pulled resources from all over the map and are conserving ammo for the defense of Pokrovsk, meaning that the other areas around the map are going to become weaker and weaker and weaker. Again, what happens when the Ukrainians rotate troops up for Vuhledar and for the Kursk operations? Pokrovsk collapses. What happens when the Ukrainians pull reserves from all over the map except Kursk to defend Pokrovsk? We start to see movement in the Kupiansk sector. We start to see movement in the Siversk sector. I'll just cover this. The Russians have advanced up into the village of Perzhini along the Bakhmutovka River right here. So again, another advance in this direction. Taking important urban settlements along this highway is very important. Also, reaching this highway would be a very, very big accomplishment for the Russians. Gaining access to these highways are going to put them on the path to Siversk much quicker than moving through fields. So these are some pretty big movements, and we could definitely see shortly a withdrawal from the Siversk pocket for the Ukrainians. All right, moving down to here to Chasiv Yar. Again, another area where we haven't seen a much improvement by the Russians over the last couple of months since Vuhledar, Kursk, and Pokrovsk have been the primary focuses. But as I've said, the weakening lines mean that the Russians are able to, exploit certain areas that they weren't able to exploit before. So here in Kalinina, we see that the Russians have crossed the Siversky Donetsk Canal here and have moved into the eastern or the western half of Kalinina. Remember, this is vitally important because this high ground right here would give the Russians a massive, massive advantage for the Battle of Chasiv Yar, much like Stopochki down here to the south. And to illustrate this, I am going to take you guys over to the topographical map. Do this. Okay, so here again, here's Chasiv Yar. Here's Bakhmut, obviously. Here's Kalinina, the village that we just talked about. Here is the position where the Russians have crossed the river, and you can see how this industrial mound and waste heap right here, this area is a significant high ground in the region, which will allow them to look down on this forested area as well as into the actual city itself. Chasiv Yar does sit on a tactical high ground, which is why the movement in this area has been so difficult for the Russians. But as the lines weaken and everything, the situation becomes much more difficult for the AFU, and the Russians continue to progress through the city. As I said, This industrial mound up here is very similar to Stopochki down here in the south, which I thought may have also been a Russian goal, may still be a Russian goal. You can just see how the Ukrainians are just enjoying the high ground position that they currently hold outside of the Russians in the micro district here. Okay. Topographical map, PogChamp. Okay, back to the map. So here in Chasiv Yar, we've seen the Russians advance to Sirorova Street, I mean, rather. So a small Russian advance inside of the city itself, with reports that the Russians have made it to Chakalova Street. So that's this street right here, showing some Russian advance inside Chasiv Yar. Again, once the Russians reach this area, the Battle of Chasiv Yar has probably come to its conclusion. This is the high ground, and this is the large industrial area of Chasiv Yar. It's really the heart of the city. Okay, moving south to Toretsk, we have further progress by the Russian armed forces in the direction of the easternmost Terekon of Toretsk itself. If you remember, this one is part of Zalizny, and this one is part of Privnichi. So this is the first one in Toretsk. It is about to be captured, potentially along with this large industrial area, which will offer the Russians a good staging point to begin operations deeper into Toretsk. Again, much like Chasiv Yar, if the Russians enter into this industrial zone in the middle and claim this Terekon waste heap, they will not only capture almost all of Toretsk by default, but also these string of villages along the edge of Toretsk here. So, again, difficult for the Ukrainians, not impossible to stabilize. The Russians are... But the... did my mic switch? Did it do it again? It did it again. Classic. Classic mic switch. Come on. It's not boomers, guys. It's because I need to buy a new mic. I hold this mic and I just disconnect it here at the bottom. So that's most of my problem. It is boomer. I guess it's boomer. My bad. Didn't mean to be a boomer, guys. And now I can't even plug this thing in. All right, there we go. Mike is back. Mike is back. At least we didn't lose all of the video and everything this time, and I was able to keep talking through it. Okay, so that's it for Toretsk for now. Not a lot of movement. It has kind of paused on this area. Remember, the Ukrainians move in reinforcements to an area, and the Russians begin pushing in another area. So Toretsk might have just restarted. Remember, Druzhba had been recently captured, so there is progress still occurring on this front. It's just slowed down from the Privnichi, Druzhba, Zalezhny, and New York time period. All right, moving over here to the Pokrovsk section of the front. There is not a ton of progress up here in the north. The Ukrainians have moved a ton of reserves up into this Pokrovsk-Mirhorod area. We should not expect a ton of Russian advances in this area for the near future, just because of the reinforcements that the Ukrainians have brought in. They have meat now to plug the holes that they did not have before, and that is going to continue. But it's good for the Russians because, as we've seen, most recently we saw a Ukrainian counterattack that I believe came down. It was potentially this road, or sorry, this road right here. Ukrainian counterattack that came down this road and tried to enter into Novohodivka. It was blown up and destroyed, and some Ukrainian prisoners were captured here. So this is exactly what the Russians want. The Russians want the Ukrainians to be trying to regain the initiative on this front, exposing manpower and armor in column form, trying to go on some sort of offensive operation in this region. That is perfect for the Russians. It's going to further attrit the Ukrainian forces and make the entire front line weaker as a result. All right, down here in Seladove, we have a confirmed Russian advance in the south of Saladove. They have captured the hospital, which is a big complex, along with this gas station, which is rather unimportant, but it just gives a marker for where the Russians are in the city. There are reports that the Russians have begun to move into the high-rise buildings in this area, which would probably spell the end for the Battle of Saladove and the beginning of the breakout into the rear areas of the Ukrainian Armed Forces' southern defense. All right, here in Kupiansk area, the Russians have advanced, capturing most or all of the village of Lizivka, along with a lot of this fortification right here, and another important fortification along this area, and gaining access to Khinki, as well as Zeleny Persha and Zeleny Druha here. So important advances by the Russians. Cause for concern over here as the Ukrainians are likely retreating from the Novelsky pocket. We've had multiple sets of reports, but no geolocations as of now. This could be gone by the end of the day. We could get an update that this has completely fallen. Time will tell, honestly, on that. But this advance right here into Kupiansk is definitely very worrisome for the Ukrainians. If the Russians gain access to this Telecom, they're going to gain access to the supply routes into Khinki from the east. And it's just going to make the situation even more complicated and difficult for the Ukrainians on this new defense line, which has already been penetrated from the north, and the Russians are currently working down the defense line here. Remember, the defense lines here face east, but behind this, there are no more eastward-facing defense lines. If you zoom out here, you can see this string, Kharkove, Dashane, Ulakli, Andrivka, all these settlements right here. There is actually a defense line that runs along these settlements, but it's a defense line defending the south, right? It's defending all of this from an advance from the south. So if the Russians get in behind Saladove, they're going to have this entire area, and they'll just be able to backdoor each of the fortifications along the line, because the fortifications are not meant to defend from the east. A very difficult situation is developing, to say the least, for the Ukrainians here. Okay, and now over to the primary area of focus for today's video, Ugledar. Ugledar is a village that has seen a lot of action. One of probably the most public Russian battlefield failures I think we've seen was in the Ugledar direction. The general that was in charge of the region at the time was just sending columns of Russian equipment into minefields, basically on approach. They were getting hit by artillery, ATGMs, everything. It was kind of a nightmare. It was over exaggerated for sure. They said that the 810th Marine Assault Brigade was completely destroyed, or Naval Assault Brigade. I can't remember. Was completely destroyed in this region, but it was in fact just not destroyed, and we ended up seeing it fighting in Kursk pretty effectively. So exaggerated, but still an L for the Russians at the time. Now we are seeing a much different situation. The city or the village to the north, Vadyane, and the number 3 coal mine are now under an extreme amount of pressure and are located on the front line, which makes any logistics, staging, or supply for Ugledar out of Vadyan basically impossible. The Ukrainian staging now has to be out of Vuhledar up here to the north, and the logistics has to run through dirt roads on these fields into Vuhledar. We did get reports the other day that the 72nd Brigade of the Ukrainian Armed Forces had been removed from Vuhledar, where it had been defending for well over a year, very effectively. A sign that Vuhledar is likely about to be captured. They moved in a territorial defense brigade, I'm pretty sure, and moved the 72nd up here to Pokrovsk to engage in fighting against the Russians in this area. Remember, if Pokrovsk falls, the entire east falls. If Ugledar falls, only this southern pocket right here falls. So the Ukrainians are now choosing the least bad option that they have available to them, trying to stabilize the situation around Pokrovsk. But in in turn losing Ugledar down here in the south. Another massive advance by the Russians. As we can see, this is 12.2 square miles, which is quite large, something like 30 kilometers, 26 kilometers, square kilometers, something like that. So a rather large Russian advance. Moving in and capturing a majority of the town of Pershivstivka, and matching the front line along the Kalashaka River here. So again, more advances, more of a difficult situation arising for Vuhledar. You can see how Ugledar is now finding itself in more of a pocket. And with the Russian advance here, if they're able to cross the river and move up into Novo-Ukrainika here, they're going to have a very, very difficult time holding Ugledar. This is what I talked about from the very beginning, guys. Yesterday, I might take you guys over to a FIRMS map, which is the fire recognition via satellites. We saw massive, massive fires in this area, potentially brush fires, but what I think it is preparation for a Russian offensive for Velika Novoselka, and then a meeting up of the Seladove front and the Velika Novoselka front here around Andreevka, closing this entire pocket. I've talked for a long time about how I expect an actual Russian offensive, not an attrition offensive where the Russians see holes and they advance, but an actual concerted Russian offensive. I don't know what time that's going to come at, but the groundwork is being laid. The front line is being prepped. The Russians can keep working up the highway towards Velika Novoselka, and then once they are ready and go time is here, it might be after the actual fall of Ugledar, we will see a larger Russian offensive here in the south to really close up this pocket and cause a lot of issues for the Ukrainians. All right, guys. I think that is it for my map today. Let me just zoom out and make sure. Nothing in Kursk, nothing in... Yep. All right, that's it. I'm going to take us over and read a few articles now. So, we had a Russian missile strike, and I just wanted to talk about this. Russian barrage targets Kiev. Ukrainian strike destroys school. So I don't know what that really means, but a Kiev official said more than 10 cruise missiles and about 10 ballistic missiles and a drone were fired on Monday morning. A Russian air attack has bombarded Kiev in the latest attack on the Ukrainian capital. Ukraine's air defense units destroyed dozens of cruise missiles and ballistic missiles earlier on Monday. No, they did not. Even by Ukrainian standards, they did not destroy dozens. Monday morning, the city's military administration said on Telegram messaging app. Meanwhile, authorities in the Russian region of Belgorod said that a Ukrainian attack destroyed a childcare facility as a warning pair continue to swap airstrikes. So the Russians claim that the Ukrainians struck a school in response for the Russians striking targets in Kiev. This is an escalatory situation that is continuing to occur, and it is becoming worse and worse and worse and worse as we go on. We're seeing basically terroristic shelling of civilians in Belgorod. Not even collateral damage. There would be an excuse if, they hit a military target or a critical infrastructure facility and civilians died in that means. But this is just random shelling with MLRS of civilians driving on roads in Belgorod. You can go to my profile and see the evidence of this. This is not a ridiculous claim. It's an MLRS strike. You see multiple rockets hitting the ground in a specific area and killing civilians. This is going to continue until the Ukrainian regime is removed from power, and there's really no ifs, ands, or buts around it. Honestly, at this point, I don't think. Yo, Scott, I've heard Ukraine officials / media are turning against the Zelensky regime. Then I saw some independent UA analysts too. Do any NAFOs actually think they're winning? Mike failed in video, please. Yeah, I know. No, I don't think that the NAFOs, I think they have an understanding of what's going on, but they're living in denial. They don't want to admit what's happening, which is fine. Let them. It's going to be funnier that way. But yes, especially in Washington and in Europe, you're seeing a lot of the media really turning against Zelensky and the entire Ukraine project just in general, talking about how it's not worth the money anymore. It's not worth the risk, not allowing further escalation and stuff like that. It's really starting to show. And the media is being hypercritical of Ukraine since the Kursk operation failed. They had their 2 weeks, their time in the sun, and now it's over. So thank you for your question. Good question. But no, I don't think NAFO is understanding. And I do think that the smarter people in the information space and in the political sphere are really starting to catch wind that this thing is going south and that it's not going to benefit anybody in the long run. Thank you for your question. All right, on to the next article. So this is just sort of a cope that I wanted to talk about. It's funny. Putin shifts stance on Ukraine peace talks amid Kursk incursion. So Russian President Vladimir Putin has reversed his stance on peace talks with Ukraine amid the ongoing incursion into Kursk region. And I want you guys to really pay attention to this article because the reaching here is unbelievable. Speaking to a group of school children in Serbia on September 2nd. So apparently Putin's foreign policy is determined in front of school children. Everything he says in a school on a propaganda, PR trip is definitely something to write an article about. Putin said that there will be a desire to enter peace talks. And he is quoted as saying, "I am sure that this provocation will fail as well. It seems to me that there will be a desire to really, not in words, but in deeds, move on to peace negotiations and resolve these issues by peaceful means. We have never given up on this, but we must, of course, deal with these bandits who have entered the territory of the Russian Federation." Putin's recent comments on negotiations sharply contrast with his initial response to Ukraine's invasion of Kursk. Hey, everybody, he's talking to school kids and saying, yeah, we still want negotiations, because that's the line that the Russian government is supposed to take. There aren't going to be negotiations. This is unbelievable cope. And it goes on further to say, in June, Putin claimed that Russia would only enter peace talks if Ukraine withdrew troops from Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporozhye, Kherson, and also abandoned their aspirations to join NATO. Victoria Vorochenko, Program Director of Security Studies at the Center of Defense Strategies, a Ukrainian security think tank, useless, told Newsweek that the Russian president is promoting peace talks because victory is unlikely. So, if you read down through the article's main sourcing is a Ukrainian security studies think tank. And the reason why they think Putin is talking about negotiations maybe to school children in Serbia is because victory is unlikely. Holy cope. That has got to be some of the furthest reaching and twisting and narrative building I have ever seen in my entire life. Also, Ukrainian security think tank. All right. I don't even think I have to say much about that. It's pretty ridiculous. Here is another article from the New York Times. With Russia on its doorstep, a Ukrainian town packs its bags. So Russian victory is unlikely, but still capturing major cities and forcing retreats. Ukraine gambled that its move into Russia would draw Moscow's forces away from the town of Pokrovsk. It didn't happen. And now resigned residents are evacuating daily. Why are they evacuating daily? Because the Ukrainian government is forcing them to evacuate. That's what's happening. Not necessarily that they want to evacuate, but they're being forced to. Okay, let me continue reading this. Place cards on the train bluntly listed its purpose: evacuation. With hugs and teary goodbyes, families bundled children and the elderly aboard coaches at the central train station in the eastern Ukrainian town of Pokrovsk. They stood and waved through the windows as they departed. With the Russian army at its doorstep and closing in quickly, Pokrovsk is a town bowing to reality. Bowing to reality. The police drive around with loudspeakers blaring instructions to leave now. Yep, forced evacuation. Municipal workers have shipped out library books, the most important aspect, because, you know, in the globalized world with printing presses and shit like that, library books are really what you need to be getting out of town. Stupidest article. It's like the stupidest things that they focus on, because what they're trying to make it look like is that Russia is going to come in and burn all the books, all of the elementary school desks. Oh, they got to get those elementary school desks out, because what are the kids going to sit in the rest of Ukraine? Other desks. This is emotional manipulation and propaganda right here. And statues from parks and squares, because you know what the Russians do? The Russians have been really keen on tearing down Ukrainian statues everywhere they go. Projection in the highest form, as we have seen Ukraine and every other Eastern European state take this opportunity to tear down every historical Soviet statue that has been raised in these countries, including statues to the soldiers who sacrificed their lives to free these places from the Nazi government in Nazi Germany in the 1940s, who were perpetrating holocausts in these countries. But yes, the Russians want to tear down Ukrainian statues and squares. By late afternoon, with its curfew in effect, the streets were eerily deserted last week, except for military vehicles zipping around. So this is a key article for a couple of reasons. One, when the Russians strike a school, a hospital, a hotel, a restaurant, anything in the Pokrovsk direction, it is now a military target from New York Times themselves. There's no ifs, ands, or buts around it. So the recent attack on the Druzhba Hotel in Pokrovsk that likely killed numerous Ukrainian military personnel was not an attack on a civilian hotel. It was an attack on a military facility being used to house Ukrainian military, because by late afternoon on the date that this article was written, September 1st, with curfew in full effect, the streets were eerily deserted except military vehicles zipping about. There it is. Plain and simple, guys. Plain and simple. According to New York Times, the only people in Pokrovsk are the civilians that want to stay to join the Russian Federation. There you go. The rest is military. So Pokrovsk is now a military city, and everything that happens to Pokrovsk, whether it is completely leveled or whether it is captured without a fight, is on Ukraine's. It's on Ukraine's shoulders. It's their responsibility. All right. Next article. No, I already did all of them. Okay. That's all I have for today, guys. A little bit of a shorter one, not a bunch of updates. Friday, Saturday, Sunday tend to be slower in terms of updates. And today wasn't overly exciting. It just usually means that there's a lot of fighting going on. So when these updates come back out, we'll have longer live streams, but this was a pretty good live stream. We're not done yet. I'm still going to talk to you guys and discuss. We have a little bit longer to discuss today. So if you guys have some questions, go ahead and start getting them in right now, and I will start answering those, and we can move on. How do you Scott? It's complicated. It's a series of very complicated actions that result in a more complicated outcome. And it never really works the way you want it to work. That's how you Scott. Let's see. Do you think that, given its experience, the 72nd Brigade could put up serious resistance in the area of Pokrovsk to the point that Russia would have to change their plan for storming the city? Definitely. The Ukrainians still have resources, but like I said, and like you have seen on the map, which I can take us over to again. If the Ukrainians come in here to defend this city with everything they have, you're going to lose the southern Donetsk area, Ugledar, which is going to compromise the defense of the city anyway. If you move units, it could compromise Toretsk, which would compromise the defense of the city anyway. And if you move units down here to defend Pokrovsk, you're going to lose places like Siversk and the Bank of the Oskal, which is going to greatly complicate the defense of the east. So, like I said, it's just it's trying to decide between two horrible options. It's really the only thing that they have going for them right now. Do we commit to defending this key logistics city, which we have to defend, or the east collapses? Or do we let the east collapse while we defend this city? That's what you're going to see over the next couple months. Hey, Scott, do you think after the war, Russia may have to face a long guerrilla insurgency in Ukraine like Afghanistan? Why or why not? It is potential that there is some form of Ukrainian nationalist movement that continues to disrupt infrastructure, just everything that the Russians are trying to do in their new territories, whatever that might be at the end of the war. Unfortunately for the Ukrainian guerrilla fighters, Ukraine is flat and does not offer very good means for guerrilla warfare. Mountainous territory, large urban settlements. Urban is harder now in the globalized age of technology where you can really, if you have access to people's private information like the Russians do and like the United States does, it's much harder to run guerrilla operations like that. They could be backed by NATO and have intel and stuff like that. I just don't think you're going to see the vigor after the war is over. I think a lot of the people who would have been doing that guerrilla insurgency have died to artillery shells, basically, in combat. So no, I don't think you're going to see a very big. I think Ukraine is going to be very, very, very exhausted and very tired after this, and they're going to go through a massive regime change, and it's going to be everything is going to look very different, and the language is going to be very different. The language being used against the Russians and towards the West and everything is going to be very different. I think what you really need to look for is the anti-West faction beginning to form in Ukraine as they get closer to abandonment by the West. And you could see a real big issue unfold for Europe and America as Ukrainians are, whether they leave or if they're forced out of the country via, conflict. A mass migration into Europe could raise a lot of issues for the countries of Europe. Thoughts on the article today? Iran sending missiles to Russians soon. They've been saying this for a year, so could happen. They sent drones. It's not impossible. The Russians are using a ton of missiles. If they need to buy more, they can buy more. I don't know. This is again, it's part of the conflicting narrative. Where is it just Iran is assisting in destruction of Ukraine, so Iran is also the enemy of the West, sort of deal? Or is it an actual piece of intelligence that they're receiving where the Russians are receiving Iranian ballistic missiles? I don't know. We've heard it multiple times and it hasn't been true up to this point. So my gut tells me no, but my mind's telling me no, but my body's telling me yeah. Let's see. Questions. Do you think that the Russians will have to storm Vuhledar? I also heard that the 110th Mechanized Brigade, which defends Avdiivka, is being sent to Vuhledar to replace the 72nd. Yeah, okay, so the 110th. It was the 110th Mechanized Brigade. But that brigade has been just refilled with basically territorial defense level quality units. They're being supplemented basically with that. So it's not like a full mechanized brigade is coming down and they're going to be able to replenish the Ugledar salient. And Ugledar is already in an incredibly difficult situation as is. So even moving troops into this area is difficult. I think the Russians are going to capture Ugledar very quick once this coal mine up here falls. And it won't be a storming operation. The Ukrainians will probably be forced to withdraw from the settlement. Tyler, what is up? Long time no see, friend. What is the breaking point for Ukraine to at least admit the basic terms of Russia? Like, what does Russia have to conquer before Ukraine is like, okay, it's over, probably not all the way to Kiev? Honestly, I don't know if it matters at this point, Tyler. they're already talking about how they're not going to give up on Kursk. I think what's going to happen for Ukraine to come to that conclusion is regime change. I think once you see regime change, the government will start saying much different things, much more in line with actual reality, and that will lead to just a morale collapse. If the morale collapse doesn't come first, but I don't think the current regime can survive the L that it would take to bring that sort of zeitgeist in Kiev forward. For that to be the common thinking that, we need to back out of the 4 oblasts and just give them what they want so we can hold on to whatever we can. That sentiment means the end of Zelensky. That goes back on everything that he has sacrificed and everything that he has worked, sent the Ukrainians to die for. If that happens, yeah, I don't think we're going to see Zelensky in office for very much longer, but it would probably be much healthier for Ukraine. Does it make military sense for Russia to stop at the Dnieper as a geographical boundary or cross it and push to the Polish border? Okay, so this is a argument that I make quite frequently. I often say that the river is the right dividing line, right? In terms of what the Russians actually want, this is the Russian area, right? This is where all the money is. This is where all the Russian speakers are. This is where the Russian culture is. This is the easy area to integrate. This is going to be where you're going to have the insurgency and the hate and the vitriol of the Ukrainian population, basically from Kiev and Uman west. Odessa, Krivorog, Nikolaev, Zaporozhye, Dnipro, Poltava, Chernigov, Sumy, all of these places, Odessa could be taken by the Russians without having much problems, and then leaving that rump Ukrainian state, which is what I've kind of always thought was going to happen. So crossing the Dnieper maybe in the south, but as I've always said, a battle for Odessa will never happen, in my personal opinion. I think that the battle for Odessa will just be the Russians walking into the city when there's no more Ukrainian army standing in their way. Like I said, the war is in the east, guys. The second the east falls, the second the regime in Kiev will cease to exist, most likely, just because of how the Ukrainian population will react to that. Got a new puppy, rescue, of course, named him Iskander. He is fast, accurate, a precision fetch. How will Ukraine now trick Americans to send boots? They're trying. They're trying to do everything. They're trying to escalate in every possible way they can, striking Moscow, striking oil refineries, striking everything. They're asking the U.S. to give them permission to strike U.S. bases. I think the next step is going to be these domestically built Ukrainian ballistic missiles. They can't produce them in enough to do continuous damage like the Russians are doing to Ukraine with Iskanders, but they will be able to likely penetrate and strike a few sensitive targets. Hopefully, in the aims of causing a stark reaction from the Russians that allows European and NATO, US, whoever to come in and offer more support. Let's see. It seems the Russians are planning an attack on Siversk. What would the fall of that mean for the Donbass? Like I said, Siversk is not super important. It would just mean that pressure would become much more present on this high ground here along the canal, which is vital for the defense of Kramatorsk and Slavyansk, as well as it would probably expose the Zhibyansky forestry to capture by the Russians, and the pressure onto Yampil and Liman here, which would, again, be the opening of the road to Slavyansk for the Russians. So Siversk is not super important right now, in my personal opinion. I think that Siversk will just fall because the Ukrainians will stop defending it, and then they'll start defending out here in these fields along the canal line, along the high ground. But that will come also when the Oskal River collapses. I think you can see a massive chunk right here just go to the Russians as the Ukrainians are forced to withdraw back here to Liman in this area. Good question. Hi, I started watching 15 minutes late and had it on speed ×2 to catch it live. All of a sudden, the normal speed slowed down. LOL, I thought you had a little stroke or something. Sorry, bro. It is funny. I sound way better in 2 times speed too. So if you guys go back and listen to all of my, or like 1.5, I sound like a idiot when I talk normal. But if you speed me up just a little bit, it's cookies, dude. That's how I listen to my stuff too, because I just want to get through it quick. I hate listening to myself talk, which is funny that I do live streams all day and listen to myself talk. It seems the Russians are. Oh wait, I already read this. According to satellite images, the Skyfall rocket was loaded and ready to go. What is your comment? I don't know what the Skyfall rocket is. I don't know what that is, to be honest. Unless that's the name of Ukraine's new missile, but I thought it was something else. Do you think the Russians have put a pause on trying to take Pokrovsk so they can focus on dealing with the Velske pocket first? No, it's just the Ukrainians. Guys, it's not that the Russians are putting a pause on anything. The Russians are going to go wherever they can go. The Ukrainians are responding to the Russians. The Russians are on the initiative. So I guess it's like a pause, but it's not a forced pause. It's just they've reached the point where they can't go without sustaining massive casualties that are not worth it. So now we stop and we just start leveling Ukrainian positions until the Ukrainian reinforcements are run through, or another breakthrough happens somewhere on the map where the Ukrainians are forced to respond and the Pokrovsk salient opens up again. Particularly, if you guys want a little prediction right now, I think it's very possible that we see another advance in the another offensive here in the Velika Novosilka area, which would really be very unfortunate for what the Ukrainians are hoping to accomplish with moving reinforcements here. Opening this up, if there's a breakthrough down here in the south, again, losing Andrivka would be just such a colossal loss that Pokrovsk won't matter anymore. The whole purpose of Pokrovsk is almost becoming void, right? It's supposed to be a logistics city, all the roads running out of it. But as you can see, logistics down here is cut. Logistics south is one of the only areas that it's actually benefiting from. And if there is an advance from Velika Novosilka up here towards Andrivka that cuts logistics to the south here, Pokrovsk is basically pointless. And now it's just a frontline city. So, yeah, I think we could see a Russian offensive potentially here, potentially here towards Zaporozhye, depending on where the lines are the weakest, just to force Ukrainian rotation. And it would look something like the Vovchansk or Kursk incursions, similar to that. Just a penetration that forces Ukrainian rotation. All right. Another question. Yo, Scott, my bad, confused. UA evacuating rapid, except I saw the Elensky city workers are planting extensive summer flower lines instead of building trenches in Pokrovsk, which I saw very poor trenches. Yeah. So actually, this is actually reminds me of something that came up in the Pokrovsk section of the front. The coal mine, the workers here, there's mines. Yeah. So there's these mines up here, and there's mines all over the place. There are a bunch of mine workers, miners, I guess you would say, in this city now that are actively preparing defenses for the Ukrainian armed forces. So, yeah, it's a bad situation that's developing. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what's going on. I don't know. Ukraine is trying to balance PR and military, and they just can't do it. They just don't have the resources to do it anymore. So it's getting worse and worse, and it's just going to continue to get worse and worse. The trenches are going to get less and less quality the further back you get. After Pokrovsk, is it flat terrain to the Dnipro? Yeah, here we go. Ready? Topographical map. The good old. So here is Donetsk. Here's Kramatorsk. Here is Pokrovsk. And as you can see, it is flat to Dnipro. It is flat. It is very, 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 very flat all throughout this territory, all the way up here. It's just flat. And then you zoom out more and you can see more. Donetsk is the high ground, and then it's just flat. The Great Plain right here. Boom. It's just flat. I mean, the whole thing is flat in and of itself. Here you can see the Carpathians. It's just a very flat place. And then only when you get into the hundreds of feet will you start to see the elevation, but it's still just flat. Hi, I'm from Ukraine. We stay to join Russia. My brother joins combat. You say people stay and no evacuate. It's true. They're called Pedrozi, waiters. Very cool. I hope you and the best for you and your brother. I find it funny that the West wants Israel to make peace with basically a militia force. Meanwhile, they want Ukraine to fight and win against an armed nuclear superpower. Well, yeah, because one is a genocide and the other is a near peer enemy that the U.S. is actively worried about combating. So makes sense in that regard. Hello from the Isle of Man. You guys have a sweet race there. Why do you think Russia hasn't advanced towards Zaporozhye? And if they do have to fight for Odessa, how would you see that going? Again, I don't think that there will be a fight. It's just too costly. But there won't be a landing or anything. If there is ever a fighting, it will just be by coming across this and then a battle in Odessa. But it's so far. It's just so much to defend. Do you think the main Russian effort to take all of the Donbass and reach the Dnieper will be in the spring of next year? No way of knowing, honestly. There's just no way of knowing. I can give you a random guess, but it's just as good as your guess. If the whole left bank of the Dnieper River, everything south of the right bank fall to the Russians, what percentage of total Ukrainian territory will be under control? A little less than 50%, I think, because Ukraine's western part of the country is pretty large. So I think it's a little less than 50%. All right, guys, that's where I'm going to wrap it up today. Thank you so much for joining me. I appreciate all of you so much. Be on the lookout for that new demonetized video on my Patreon. Go sign up there as a free member. Turn on the notifications. Please go like, subscribe, and comment on this video. You guys have been killing it lately. We've been going up, 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 and up, and I love it so much. It has been fantastic. The streams are getting better. The questions are getting better. My chat is getting better, so I really appreciate that. That's my goal. I want this thing moving the entire time we're on here talking. I appreciate you all so much. Please tune in next time. Probably going to be on Wednesday for my next live stream. And yeah, take care and have an amazing week. Make it worth it, guys. Make it happen.